Hello everyone, before talking about more trading, I would like to start with the earthquake in Turkey. If you are only interested in the trading part, you can skip the first half, but I would like to talk about life today. This was one of the biggest natural disasters that happened in the Republic of Turkey within its 100 years of history. Right at the moment, the number of people who lost their lives is more than 20,000, and this will probably increase in time. The number of injured people is more than 80,000. These pictures are not enough to explain all the scenery. It is like a war zone. This was such a heartbreaking event. I myself am a survivor of 1999 earthquake near Istanbul. It is impossible to explain the feelings. You just live with this trauma forever. But we people as nations need to work 10 times harder to recover from such events. We need to build a future for the earthquake survivors. There's no time to get upset. This earthquake affected more than 10 cities. Around 10 million people are affected by it. Not everyone lost their homes, but most buildings are damaged in these cities. Most people will be relocated after this event, trying to build a new life and a new future for themselves. Most will start from the zero. We have to work, but nothing else to help the people recover. I have quite an international channel receiving viewers from around 100 different countries. My Turkish followers are actually less than 1%. I would like to thank all of you and your nations for all the help and remembrance. This is the list of countries and the number of search and rescue teams sent. I cannot confirm the numbers. It could be less or more. I never count such numbers, even sending one person or even just remembering enough. As you know, Greece and Turkey have always had tension between them, but they are one of the first countries that sent help. I would like to repeat that if we remove politics, we, regular citizens, have no problem against each other. I studied at a university in England. I had so many friends from many nationalities. I never had a single problem with any of them. Friends from Asia, Africa, Europe, America, everywhere. No problem at all. So all the issues are actually at political levels that are based on power, energy, and money. I'm sure all of you know it. So I would like to thank all of you one more time. As you know, we live in a capitalistic world. You may like it or you may hate it. You accept it or deny it. Right now, it is what it is. And it's not going to change anytime soon. We trade for money, we invest for money, we go to work for money, we do business for money, we save money to do anything. We spend all our lives trying to earn money. What is the most basic need of a person? A home. The most basic need. The problem with developing countries like Turkey, reaching this most basic need, a home, is extremely hard at the moment. No people actually want to live in a very old or low quality building. But they have no choice. The average cost of a 2-bedroom house in Turkey at the moment is more than $100,000. The monthly earning of an average person are around $500. So it is impossible to own a house at the moment. This is the result of over-capitalism and bad government management. We need more human-centric governments all over the world, helping people with their most basic needs, a reliable home, high-quality buildings. I think this is one of the top problems in the world right at the moment. The rest of the video is about trading, which I was planning to shoot before the earthquake. So life continues. We have to keep working harder and harder to help people to recover. Today, we'll talk about how to find the best trades, how to avoid bad trades, what to do if we miss trades. This will be another great video of what I did last week. I missed some trades and how I made some crazy gains again. We have so much to cover. If you're ready, let's start. welcome our free trading course, all about price action trading strategies and smart money concepts. With this video, I'll teach you how to find the best trades. If you are looking for a structured table of contents, I set it up for you. You can find it on Google Drive or directly from my website, which is in the description. It is important to watch videos in order so you will not miss anything. Okay, let's start our analysis with the 1-hour chart because we have been following this lovely range for quite a while. As always, this range gave us unlimited trading opportunities, long or short. I'll talk about missed trades, not work trades, and great trades. Let's start with this lovely long trading opportunity that many of us missed. Once the price pulled back to range low and the discount areas, this was a great long opportunity. Price made a quick liquidity hunt with this swing failure pattern. I'll talk about this kind of SFP because you can also consider this as a form of liquidity. Now let's open the 15-minute time frame and check out the missed long trade. Before thinking about the trade, I'm just looking at the possible targets above. Anywhere or anything that can pull the price up. This obvious liquidity pull is our ultimate goal. On the road, you can use this clear giant imbalance. Here is another mid-level target for you, and another imbalance area. So in my mind, there are 4 possible targets here that are all usable. Right after price touches the range low and clears liquidity with the swing failure pattern, you can notice the shift here. Again, we do not focus on market structure breaks in the middle of the desert. We only wait for high time frame liquidity hunts or demand supply reactions. There is this little tiny imbalance right here. If you open lower time frames, you'll notice a much clearer imbalance. Now, this is a possible trade, around 3-hour setup here with a large stop loss cushion. However, in my mind, this is not the best setup. Why? Because the reaction to SFP and range low was not that great. I would enjoy something much more powerful, a high quality break, a strong displacement. But you can risk 0.5 R here. Any of us can risk 0.5 R. It is not that much. Now, it has 4 possible take profit locations. However, the first one is not in a great position, very close to our entry. So basically, TP2, TP3, TP4, and the final swing high as liquidity should be our main targets. Let's talk about another trade that I waited for but never happened. After this considerable swing failure pattern, I waited for the price to get back to premium levels and range high areas to short it. I marked my imbalance and this clear supply zone for possible entry points, but both of them did not give me clear entries. Let's zoom in on this area in 5 minutes and talk about how to avoid bad trades and save our money. I want you to look closely here. Please pause the video and tell me what you see here. Price keep making low time frame higher highs and keep moving upwards. Do you see any sharp breaks or displacements downwards? No, not at all. I would like to see this clear movement downwards with a significant imbalance behind it. This is how I can confirm a valid and quality high time frame supply area that is usable for me. This trade actually could have been a quality high time frame ROTE setup as well. But I noticed that if I enter trades without low time frame confirmation nowadays, my trades mostly stopped out at break-even. I think all the algorithms are getting clever and clever. So we need more and more confirmations before entering trades, or using our dynamic risk management method to reduce our risk, if you only use high time frames as entries. Let's check another trade that I have missed. Some people asked me, how do I keep catching great sniper trades? As you can see, I have missed one great trade. I've been waiting for another trade but never happened. Now I'll show you another trade that I have missed it. The next trade will be the only trade I managed to take. So I missed so many trades. Do not worry, I am no different than you. Okay, as you can see, this liquidity swept and price reacted strongly back. Let's open the 15-minute time frame and dissect it even more. So, let's discuss this. Is this a swing failure pattern, a liquidity sweep, or is this an equal high? Personally, I say personally, because this is my opinion. This is not a great swing failure pattern. More on the gray area, actually closer to equal highs, because I want to see my liquidity sweeps deeper and significant. I can say, oh great, this is a very clear liquidity sweep, not an equal high. So this area is more likely internal liquidity inside a premium area. Later on, there is a break here, but the break itself is not quite strong. However, candlesticks have large bodies and powerful, impactful displacement. It also creates this large imbalance that we want to see. As a target, you can see this nice imbalance which is back inside our range. Now, I did not take this trade. I think this was an average trade, mid probability. So, why would I risk so much? You could have been risking 0.5 hour for this trade and kept protecting your account. Finally, my trade. This week was not that great actually for me. I was busy outside and I did not manage so many trades. Let's see. First of all, what we have here, a nice mitigation block. Right below the mitigation block, you can notice how the internal liquidity is building. And obviously, the imbalance. Again, I published more than 50 videos on price action. We use different approaches. However, at the end of the day, we always used same trading entry methods. Now, what is below equal lows? What makes this special? That is inside the discount area of the range. So targeting equal lows and the range low areas. Let's zoom into the 2-minute time frame and check for an entry. Right after internal liquidity sweep and imbalance and supply reaction, price sweeps internal liquidity with swing failure pattern. Again, is this the best SFP? No, not really. However, I wanted to take a risk because it was reaching to a great zone. Precise break with strong displacement, very clear imbalance. I was watching this trade live, candle by candle before the entry. Once the price pulled back to the optimal trade entry zone and filled the imbalance, I made my entry. I closed most of the trade around the range high area. I did not want to push my luck. Then closed another partial at around the range EQ area, which was also a demand area. I kept the leftovers until the equal lows, range low, and range discount area. So, 4 trades. 2 missed, 1 did not give an entry, 1 success. Another day in a trader's life. Okay folks, we finished another video. I hope you subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you, please take care and see you soon.